Yo, yo, yo. Hey guys, welcome back to another amazing edition of the Best Practices Show. Do you have challenges solving problems as a dental team? I hope not, because the better you get at solving problems, the healthier your team becomes. But a lot of people don't know how to effectively solve problems, so they recycle the same garbage over and over again. Well, today we're going to give you a great tool. And we have a great coach on. Her name is Miranda Beeson, and she shares one tip for team problem solving. I promise you, if you use this framework, your practice will get better month over month. So please listen to this. I hope you guys enjoy it, and we'll see you soon. Hey guys, welcome back to the Best Practices Show podcast. You know I love doing this. You keep showing up. I'm going to keep bringing it with brilliant minds, brilliant teachers, brilliant coaches. And today we have one of the most brilliant coaches of all time, Miranda Beeson. And we're going to be bringing great information, as always, to help you improve your practice and your life. And one of the biggest challenges you have as a dental team is how to solve problems. If you solve problems effectively, you're teaching everyone we can deal with these issues and we can move forward. If you don't, it's like recycling garbage over and over and over again. We talk about the same things, but nothing ever happens. Well, today we're going to break the chain, if that's the case for you, with one tip for team problem solving with Miranda Beeson. Miranda, thank you so much for being back. I always appreciate you.
Thanks so much. I love being here. I'm excited to do this today.
Yeah. So tell us, okay, let's do this one. Like, where did you come up with this idea? Obviously, you're a brilliant person. You come up with a lot of great ideas, but give us the background. Why is this important?
Well, I'll tell you what, I follow a lot of leadership on Instagram and podcasts, and there's a leadership coach on Instagram that I follow a lot. His name is Dan Martell, and he has a book which I have not read yet, but it's on my queue, Buy Back Your Time. And there was this little clip that he shared about the 1-3-1 rule. So we're going to talk about this 1-3-1 rule and how it empowers your team members to solve problems. And it cued for me because in dentistry and being a practice coach, we hear it all the time. My team comes to me all day long. My team comes to me all day long with problems. I really just want them to be able to take the initiative to solve some problems. The whole book, E-Myth, dentists are entrepreneurs, and it's hard to be the entrepreneur, the manager, and the technician all at the same time. And so if we can help teams to solve problems and be solutionists, at least on those lower level issues that maybe don't really require as much of our input as dentists and practice owners, then it's just going to help so much with being able to focus on that technician piece during the workday and empower them, really. So I think the biggest piece is when I heard this, and once I explain it, it's going to make so much more sense. But when I heard him talking about this 1-3-1 rule, I said, oh my gosh, like this relates in our world. And actually, I got to give the shout out. Michelle, one of our coaches, is the one who shared and introduced me to him first. And so we talked about it together, and like, this has just got to happen in our coaching world and introduce it to our community. So I think it's just going to really help dentists who are stuck in that. How do I be the technician and be the best that I can be for my patients all day long? And then also be everything I need to be for leading my team when I can't always be there in the moment to solve these problems that pop up during the day. Yeah. And the other piece around it is that dentists get burnout really easily when they are having to juggle all of those roles all at one time. We talk about burnout a lot. It's been more and more common over the last several years in our industry. And when you have a really strong team that can support you, you can feel a lot of the relief from feeling like you have to keep all of those balls in the air all on your own. So this just empowers your team to be able to support you more as the practice owner and the problem solving that goes on day to day in your practice.
Yeah, I love it. And so I can't wait to dissect this, but also too, I mean, if we could just take this to life, part of what makes life meaningful is solving problems, whether they be small or big. And then another thing to realize about business, every business in the United States, especially yours, if you're listening to this, it exists for solving problems. So problems become the pathway for a lot of your future success. And you build this muscle memory. And what's really been fun for us is now we know how to effectively problem solve, because you're exactly right. Whenever there was a problem, I'm like, give me a week. I'll figure this all out by myself. And they're like, what are you talking about? And so I always love
the other thing we hear, not to interrupt you, I apologize, but it cued a thought for me. The other thing we will hear is, I have to do it because I don't have a committed team who will.
Right.
And it's kind of the chicken or the egg, because if we are always solving all the problems and not handing it back to our team and empowering our team to make decisions, they're not going to build a level of confidence and commitment to do that on their own. And so it's that question of which one comes first. Sometimes you have to give them the trust and give them the opportunity to show up. And yes, they're not going to always do it just like you would want them to do it, or you would do it yourself. And so we find that in coaching that sometimes you do just have a team member that doesn't care and isn't committed. But when you have the right people in the right seats and you have a supportive team, they're going to be more committed to the success and the vision and what you're asking of them when you give them these little moments and pieces to build autonomy and empower them to be decision makers in the practice too. You have to give them a little grace that it might take time to understand how and you would want things to turn out. And again, it might not always be exactly how you would have done it, but if they know your core values, that's the first filter that they have to put every decision and problem solve through, just like you would. So if they know your core values and they say to them, you say to them, like, I trust you to work through this problem, keep our core values in mind, and then use this framework that I just heard about on this podcast with Kirk and Miranda. And I want you to give it a go and start to give them a little bit of that empowerment and build some confidence in your team.
Yeah, what you're saying is absolutely true. Now, I don't want you to get the impression, if you're listening to this, that I'm saying I've arrived. But like, one of the fun things about what Miranda's talking about is that when you do grow leaders and you do give them a framework and they do know your values, they solve problems that you're not even aware of. They're like, you didn't even know about this, but I fixed this and I'm hoping you like this. And you're right. It's not always like exactly what you want, but you're like, oh my gosh, that saved me like 4 hours of time, probably, that you guys made a decision. And there are sometimes they hit it out of the park. You're like, I wouldn't even have thought of that. That is fantastic. And I didn't even know that was a challenge. And so our hope by giving you this framework is that as you test it and as you learn about it, it'll start to free up some of your brain space and also make your team a much higher functioning team. Don't you think?
Yes. And working with clients and using similar philosophies to this. I have a client that I work with, and she likes to, what we always say, pretty things up. And, she wants it to look a certain way. But the great news is her team takes it, runs with it, creates a solution. A lot, like you said, a lot of times she'll say, like, gosh, I didn't even think about it the way they thought about it, because they're the one doing that thing all day long. But then she gets to take it to the final finish line with like prettying it up and getting it like to look aesthetically or whatever the way that she wants it to, if they're designing a system or maybe some new thing that's going to be in the office. But yeah, you have to give up a little bit of that control over the final outcome and say, like, let's like give them this and say, hey, take it to that first or maybe even that second 80%, and you'll start to see people really show up, because then they're really proud of the work that they do. And once they're proud and empowered, you can take a breath and know that like they've got it under control, and then they're really only coming to you when it's a true emergency that something needs to be elevated to your decision-making level.
I love it. So let's start unpackaging it. What is the 1-3-1 rule?
All right. Well, it's I think really simple. So it surprised me when it just blew my mind the way that it did. But it starts by just defining the one real issue. So that first one in the 131 is what is the real issue? Let's identify the one thing that needs to be solved. A lot of times when we work with teams, what we find is we're talking about something and we go like, I don't think that's really the issue here. And so once we can really define what is that one true issue, that's the first one in the 131 rule. The 3 is now the team member, now that they know what that one issue is, they're going to try to identify 3 potential solutions. Now, in our To the Top Study Club a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this briefly in the room. And Jenny and Christina, a couple of our coaches, and Christina, our director of operations, they said, and one of those things should cost the practice no money, which I loved. So you're challenging them even a little bit further. It can't just be like, we need another person to do that, right? We need them to dig a little deeper to get creative with their problem solving. So that 3 in the 131 is to identify 3 potential solutions to that issue or problem. Bonus, one of them should cost the practice no money. And then that second one in the 131 is what is your one recommendation now that you've sifted through these 3 potential solutions. So just to give you an example, I was with a team this week in Michigan, and we had a great time working through a little exercise with this. And we talked about nomads. So if you have a Nomad, a portable X-ray machine in your office, I promise you have heard at some point or another that we run behind or we get off track because we have to share the Nomad. Can we just get another Nomad? Well, Nomads are really expensive. And so that's not always the easiest solution. It might be one of your 3 potentials, right? So in working through this, you might say, okay, the one issue is we have schedule bottlenecks that occur from the limitation of having one Nomad. So empowering the team to come up with 3 potential solutions, they might say, we need another Nomad, right? That's one solution. They might say, we could calibrate at morning huddle to know when we have FMXs or those x-rays that are going to take a little bit longer so that we can try to plan for how are we going to share this Nomad throughout the day. Again, that doesn't cost the practice any money. And then third, perhaps we calibrate our wall units that we kind of thought we weren't really going to be using anymore in our operatories now that we got the Nomad. But wouldn't it be great if they were calibrated and we could use them for backup when we are stuck? And so then the team has these 3 potential solutions they came up with. And then they can pick which one of those they want to start with as an action item. And so they might say, you know what, let's start with seeing what it would take to get our wall units calibrated. And then we all have a backup in case the Nomad is occupied. Great. So that might cost the practice a little bit of money. I don't know if you have to pay your state certification boards, but it's minimal compared to getting 1 or 2 more Nomads. And it empowered the team to take that on as a project and find a solution to what's going on. And now they're unified in it together. And it's not Susie mad at Jane because Jane didn't put the Nomad back. It's like the whole team working together to find a solution to a problem. And you're just going like, I approve. That's a great plan. Good job.
Yeah. I think, well, I was thinking you're a genius, but you are. Dan Martell and his book, which is really well named Buy Back Your Time, which is where this came from. Now you think about the architecture of the 131. I mean, number 1 is defining what the real issue is. But even if you do that and you're a dentist and somebody just brings you the 1 without the 3 and the 1, now you're burdened with trying to come up with the solution. And you're not getting any buy-in with the last one. So this is a really important, the architecture, I love it, is like, what's the real issue? You got to bring 3 possible solutions and then pick the one that you want to go with. Now, here's I'll be the devil's advocate here. Miranda, you don't understand. Like, we can't even, like, this sounds pretty difficult. Like, how am I going to train, especially if I have a larger team? I've got a team of 20 people. How do I even start to teach them this concept?
So that's a great point because, yes, that would be what we start with. And I would say that doing something simple when we get started with this is the easiest. But before we even say, like, okay, I heard this podcast, I want to go try to do this in my office. You really have to start with expectations. Everything that we talk about with coaching comes back to one equation, which is E minus R equals C. And when our expectations don't meet our reality, we're always going to have conflict. So most team members aren't setting out to make your life harder. It might just not be clear to them what the expectations are. Again, maybe you've created a culture where it's an accidental culture of like the doctor solves all the problems. Oh, he doesn't want us to make any decisions, or she doesn't want us to make any decisions. And you're over there going like, man, I wish they would make some decisions, right? Because we haven't actually talked about it and laid out the expectations for how our team engages in problem solving here. And so I think the first piece is just getting really clear around the expectations with your team on like, hey, I want to be here for you, and I want to be able to answer problems, and I want to be able to make sure that, we're on track, but I want you to feel empowered to make decisions too. And there's some things that honestly, I probably don't know as much about as you do because you're doing this all day. If there's an issue with the phones, who's probably the right person to start troubleshooting the issue with the phones? Not whoever answers the phone. So getting really clear with the team around your expectations of what is expected of them in problem solving or not, and where you want to empower them. And then letting them know, like, we have solutions, we have tools like this 131, or another one that we talk about and we use in our ACT coaching process is the IDS tree that we got from our coach, Jamie. And the IDS tree is just another framework similar to this one, where there's a tree and we're looking at the tree houses that one real issue or that one true problem, and then identifying what are the roots that affect this issue, and then being able to solve those roots kind of one at a time. So I think it starts with, you have to decide what kind of culture of problem solving you want in your practice. And if you do want to have culture that empowers your team to be part of that decision making, to relieve some of that burden, which like who wouldn't? That you have to start with making sure they know that that's something you'd like to start creating within the practice, and then build in some structure and some frameworks, because sometimes they don't even know how to problem solve. Maybe they've never been developed in that way. So I think tools like this concept and the IDS tree are just great ways for the team to be on the same page about how we are looking at problems here in the practice.
Yeah. So you said two things that I love. Well, you said a lot. You mentioned expectations. We're going to go there in a second. But then also tools. Do you have a tool for the 131 other than just the 131? And my brain is exploding.
Currently, no. But I have it.
Look at this.
I have it on the docket. It's going to be coming our way. ACT will have a tool. I love it so much. And to be completely honest, I like to guinea pig things with some teams that are open to guinea pigging things. And working with this team last week in Michigan, we just had such a great time. I told them, like, I have this new idea that I learned from Dan Martell on Instagram Reel, believe it or not. And I think it's going to be awesome. And it just was so great. And the team felt so empowered to be solving these problems on their own and not just being told what to do. It was energizing in the room. And I just thought, like, oh, we have to make a resource out of this. So it'll be there soon. I can assure you of that.
And I have no doubt that once Miranda gets a hold of this, it's going to be spectacular. But if you have a piece of paper in front of you, look at it. I'm going to create the very simple drawing. Yep. Draw 3 columns, and in the left column, write what's the real issue, and put a 1 up there. And in the middle, put like 3 rows within the middle column, 3 possible solutions, and then in the right one, put which one do you want to go with. Now, here's the important piece of a tool. Because a lot of times in education, you hear about something and you're like, oh, this thing, and it becomes this cognitive challenge for everybody. You said a 1-2-1. What was the 1-4-1? We love teaching through the use of tools, because with the tool, once the tool is established, you don't have to waste mental energy on figuring out how does the tool work. Now you're putting all your cognitive energy towards the actual solution through the tool. So as you grow as a practice, it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to this, because you can say, okay, listen, and you can also effectively model. Let's say you take that penciling graph or diagram I just gave you, and you said, hey, listen, I want to employ a 1-3-1 framework and I'll go first. Mm-hmm. Let's take anything, throw it at me. Like, let's do this together. I think you could walk your team, don't you think, through filling out one of these tools?
It could be as simple as, we don't have enough room in the mini fridge for all of us to bring our lunches to the office. Like some of the tiniest things. I just think about the things as a dental practice owner that you probably hear that you're like, do I have to figure that one out? Like little things like that. Great. 1-3-1 it. 1-3-1 it. Like once it's a framework, once it's a verb in your practice, something that everyone rallies around. Again, the expectation is there that like this is how we solve problems. Anything that comes up as simple as that can be run through that framework.
Yeah. And wouldn't you agree? Like I'm way into the future right now. Let's say you create this worksheet and somebody brings you could say to your team, like, you don't have to fill it all out. If you get started on it, I'll help you finish it. But like maybe not come up with the answers, but show them over and over again how to use the tool. You have to learn it too. This would be incredible. That's what I love this. This truly is a game changer. You're going to save thousands and thousands of hours of your life if you can put this framework into your practice. Now, I want you to speak about expectations. What does that mean? What are you talking about?
So expectations are, I think, where we miss the mark the most in teams. So if there is something that's not going the way that we want it to, or like, I'll just use an example of what we're talking about today. You know, every time I'm in my office, I come back and there's 7 Post-it notes and 3 people that come in that 3 minutes that I'm in there in between patients. And I'm just so overwhelmed. Why is my team like this? Why can't they solve problems? And if I have a client who comes to me with this type of issue, like, it was just another one of those days. I had 7 Post-it notes when I got into my office in between my crown preps today. Like that's something you're frustrated by, but maybe there's no other expectations set in the practice around how we handle problems. And it's become this, again, like accidental culture of this is how we solve problems. We put a Post-it note on the doctor's desk. And so if there hasn't been a verbalized expectation to the team around anything ultimately, but around, in this framework, how we solve problems, then they're going to come up with their own solution. There's going to become a culture of how we solve problems that just happens. So if we want to be intentional about how we want to empower our team to solve problems, we have to be really, really clear about what we expect. I expect for you to at least have looked at 3 potential options. If you can't find 3, like 1 or 2, like get the ball rolling. And then they know, okay, before I head in there, I need to at least have thought this through. When I was in administration, I didn't have a framework like this that I used, but I would often say to team members when they came to me, tell me what you've tried so far so I know where to pick up.
Right.
And that implied, I expect that you've already attempted to solve this, right? Have you already called our Patterson rep? Have you already called the IT guy and like you're just not getting anywhere? Like where are you at? Now, that was like an unspoken expectation that they learned by my response. And so in the same way, if you incorporate a framework, like we're going to start using this 1-3-1 framework, when someone comes to you with an issue like, the phones aren't working, cool. Have you 1-3-1 that yet? Like where are you at on the 1-3-1? And if you just reference back to that, we talked about running all of our problems through a 1-3-1 from now on. Where are you at with that so I can pick up? And so the expectation is clear to the team, and it's not like, well, what is he even talking about? I've never heard of this 1-3-1. I usually just put a Post-it in there and everything gets better.
Yeah.
Yeah, without the expectation, you're going to be frustrated always. And your team can't live up to your expectations if they don't know what they are.
Right.
And so if you're frustrated with your team, it's for one of 2 reasons. One, you've identified your expectations and they truly aren't living up to them, and you need to have some conversations with them around their performance. Or 2, you've never really clearly identified what your expectations are, and so they don't even know that they're not meeting them.
Yeah. I love that. I absolutely love that. I have so many thoughts, but we got to keep this to an hour. So Deborah Englehart Nash says this, and I love it. She said on the podcast, when you ask your team members to do something and they don't do it, there's only 2 reasons why they don't. Number 1, they don't clearly know what to do and know what's expected, or they don't want to do it. And you just as a leader have to decide. And I'm hoping that the people listening on this podcast are starting to create a culture where they have people that want to do things. And you're right. My biggest challenge in the world is consistency. And that's really been one of my main efforts here. But it's amazing how powerful it is to be consistent and the impact it has on other people. So I can totally see, like, if you lean into the tool and say, hey, listen, remember we talked about this. This is the system we use for solving problems, you're going to see people will lean into it. So
you just made me think about something that made me laugh. So when I was growing up, we knew Dad would more often say yes than Mom. Mom was a little stricter, and we would often go to Dad, and clearly Mom and Dad had identified some alignment around this, because Dad started developing this go-to phrase of, have you asked your mom yet?
Mm-hmm.
And when you just said that, that's immediately what it made me think of. And so his response to our parenting was always like, well, have you asked your mom yet? And so it's that same conflict resolution of like, now the expectation has been laid clear that like we are expected to ask Mom.
Yeah. Your dad is a very smart person. He did not come up with that on his own. That was a countermeasure to the conflict he was experiencing from his spouse. Yes, and he's like, I need a countermeasure for this. So now all traffic goes that way.
Exactly.
I know that because I've experienced that hands down myself many times. So,
have you run this by Mom yet? So, have you run this through the 131 yet? Yeah.
Yep. So
I think another great thing, like people are going to say, like you said, devil's advocate a minute ago. So how do we even do this? How do I implement this in my office? So I mentioned like you have to share the idea with your team. You have to make really clear expectations. So like, when am I supposed to do that? Just like in the hallway, or the next time I get to my desk and there's 7 Post-its and I go storming out there waving them around like, we're not doing this anymore. Like, no, that's probably not the best way to share it with your team. Hopefully, listeners to this podcast are aware that we really believe in team meetings. And if you do have team meetings in your practice, they're a fantastic opportunity for you to align as a whole team on important topics, expectations, changes that are happening in the practice. It's just a really great way to have the time that's not rushed, right? This dedicated time for us to really build understanding of why. Anytime we introduce a new concept, to really get the team to rally around it, having them understand why this is important and why we're doing this, talk through it. And then as a team, like you might spend, 20 minutes at a team meeting running through, you might listen to part of this podcast. Hey, I heard this new topic and I want to talk about this as a team. Listen to this and tell me what you guys think. Do you think this is something we can make work in the practice? Because I'd really like to try. Sometimes I think as a leader too, with this particular topic, you do have to be vulnerable with your team at times. And I think that leaders, dental practice owners especially, feel that they have to be the expert all the time. Because we're the expert chair side, right? And the dentistry for the patient. All 7 of these people look to me for leadership. All 20 of these people look to me for leadership. But some of the best leaders are the leaders that can approach things in a very humble way, in a very vulnerable way, and say, I want to do my best for you guys, and I'm really trying. But I'm really struggling with how we solve problems here in the practice. And I want to be able to do it in a timely manner for you. I want to make sure that I'm helping us get where we need to go. And I'm just struggling with that. So I'd like to try something new. Can you guys help me? Are you on board? And if we approach it that way, it's bringing them into understanding like why this is like, why all of a sudden are we having to do this differently? Yeah. Because everyone resists change a little bit. And if you can just be a little vulnerable around, how it's impacting you, how it's impacting the practice, and ultimately how you feel like this might benefit and impact the team, they're going to rally around this idea and be more apt to jump into like giving it a try.
Yeah. I love it. I want to go back to what you said. The team meeting becomes the fulcrum for how you make so many good changes. Now, it's important to have a regular team meeting. We say this at ACT all the time. Morning huddles are for patient care. Weekly team meetings are for practice care. And when you're doing that proactively, you can stay on the healthy side of things. If you're a dentist who's like, I don't do team meetings unless I need to, you're basically calling a rally cry because you're upset about something and it's reactive. This really stinks the way we're doing this. So I'm just going to put my foot down and show you guys how we're going to do this. You also don't have a follow-up measure to see how these new initiatives are working. So we're just going to do it again in another month. So I'm being facetious about that. But the point is that your team's a lot more open when you're having a regular cadence of meeting with them. And you're doing it not over lunch. You're doing it in prime patient time, which I'm a big advocate of doing it on Tuesday or Wednesday mornings, because you could be prepping teeth, but by having a team meeting, you're making a huge statement that my team is more important than patients and production are, which will ultimately come back to you tenfold if you've ever done it. You know how important that is. And you can now start to solve problems. And I want you to talk about the no thank you bite. What's a no thank you bite? And how do we use that in this?
So most moms know what the no thank you bite is for sure. But, when you're sitting around the dinner table and you try something new and everyone looks at it and they're like, what is this? I don't eat broccoli. I don't eat asparagus, whatever. Well, we need to at least take a no thank you bite. I need you to at least try it. I know Jenny, one of our coaches, talks about this too. Like if you're at someone else's house and they serve food that you're not familiar with, don't at the table. Just take a no thank you bite. Take a bite or two and then, we move on. I tried it and it wasn't for me. Or guess what? You try it and you might like it. And so we talk about with teams, you're going to get pushback. I'm a big fan of DISC, if anyone's ever heard me on this podcast or anywhere before. And the bulk of our patient population, S styles and C style people, that's 84% of communicators, are resistant to change. And so there's going to be pushback. You have to just know that anytime you try something new or bring a new idea, you're going to get a little bit of pushback. But I want them to just take a no thank you bite. I want you to just give it a try. Let's set a time frame around it where we're going to try this new framework of how we solve problems for the next 2 weeks. Instead of bringing me a Post-it, let's work through this 131. For the next month, and, let's work through this 131. And then I want to revisit with you guys how you're feeling about it and if you think it's working and what we could be doing differently. And then if you do have a consistent cadence with your team meetings, then you can visit it week over week or in 2 weeks from now, or put it on the agenda a month from now so that we're making sure we're following up, and then do what you say and do actually follow through and check in with them on how it's going. Usually by 2 weeks in, if you're doing that, like, oh, did you do the 131? And we're following all of the steps that we've talked about so far on this, where we bring it up at the meeting, we set the expectation that this is what we're doing. We consistently as leaders go back to remember, did you ask your mom yet? Did you try the 131? 2 weeks later, a month later, we check in. And now the team has started to get a rhythm for this new way that we solve problems in the practice.
Yeah.
I think you have to celebrate when team members do it well.
Totally.
I think we don't talk enough about the power of celebrating the positive that happens in the practice. There's a lot of psychology around positive encouragement. It takes 10 things or something to outweigh one negative. And if we feed that behavior that we are looking for with positive reinforcement, we're going to get more of that in the end. So when you do see your team showing up and taking that no thank you bite, even if they didn't do it just right, they didn't do 3 options, they only wrote down 1, they came to you with just 1 recommendation, like, hey, awesome, I'm so glad you attempted this new framework. Tell me a little bit about how it went for you. Like, pick their brain a little bit, celebrate them, maybe even acknowledge them to other team members. And be able to celebrate that, like, this is working out great. Like, I appreciate you so much. It's really changed the course of my day. I feel like now as a practice owner, I can really show up better for you and for the patients. Because when we have that positive spin and not just correcting when people maybe aren't doing it, because that could then set a negative tone on this new process. Yeah. If all they hear from us is like, you guys aren't using the 131 versus the one time they did do it, we really celebrate it. Other people are going to want that feedback and that positive celebration as well, and they might jump in to getting on board.
Totally. And what you're talking about is so true, because it creates a negative narrative from the top when you're only seeing the negative. I mean, and the world is trading that way. If you have kids that ever go to school and they bring home a report card and they have 4 A's and 1 C-, you can't stop talking about the C-. You don't even think about the A's. Or if you have a son that plays baseball, you're like, wow, you did great except for that 1 error. You know what I mean? Like, that's all you're thinking about. So you do have to cognitively train yourself to be a little bit more, and you've mentioned this a lot. I mean, a lot of this is, emotional intelligence or emotional awareness of your words and how they impact other people. But here's the cool part about what Miranda's sharing. This is an incredible tool that if you use it consistently, and let me explain that word, because again, I'll be the devil's advocate, because if you were a team member and you've ever worked for me, you're like, I love education. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. I take a lot of courses, man. I just listen to this podcast and this Miranda Coach, she was awesome. She talked about this 131. My team members in the past would go, okay, bald guy just listened to a podcast. I'm going to count the days, and he's totally going to forget this like 7 days from now. He won't even remember the 131 thing. They're waiting for you to forget what you just said because you're not consistent. So if this is important to you and you're not consistent, you have to be consistent, or you have to have somebody else hold you accountably to being consistent in that. And I hope you understand what I'm saying, but these things matter when you can solve problems. Now, there's so many benefits to effective problem solving. Here's one of my favorite. If you follow Miranda's framework, which is the 131, just by doing the first one and you identify what the real issue is, you ultimately solve other issues. So if you solve one big problem and you really get your arms around what the one big problem is, sometimes it clears up scheduling. Sometimes it eliminates steps and financial arrangements. Sometimes it accidentally fills the schedule. You'll be amazed by how impactful solving big problems has on small problems. Am I on the right track here?
Oh, absolutely. We find that all the time in coaching. One thing, we bring up one thing, and next thing we know, we're like, oh, well, that feeds into this, and then that feeds into this, and then that feeds into this. And so if we can take care of these problems and I think the ultimate real benefit of this is in a much more efficient way, in a much more timely way. Because if you're waiting for all 7 Post-its to get cleared, and tomorrow I get 7 more, and the next day I get 7 more on my desk, the team's waiting sometimes a really, really long time to solve problems, which then does have a negative impact on all of those little offshoots that we just said can spawn from the one issue. And it's going to take that much longer, and more piles up. So it also feeds into the efficiency of, if we can handle this one big problem and you get started on it, and then I can just drive it home for you, we're going to solve this, and then not to mention have a positive impact on all of those other things that relate to it as well, and in a much more timely manner than if I had to get through this on my to-do list. And my to-do list just keeps getting longer and longer and longer, right? Because I'm the entrepreneur, the manager, and the technician. So I have 3 to-do lists sitting on my desk for each of those roles. It's just hard. It's hard. Like, I think it's just really great for us to talk about this because it is really, really hard. We talk about dental practice entrepreneurship. And when I talk with dentists, like, most of them didn't go into dental school to be an entrepreneur. My son's in an entrepreneur business academy at his high school. And I went in and talked to the school last year. They do master classes, and they didn't even think about dentistry as entrepreneurship. When we were talking about how I, help coach entrepreneurs, and they're like, oh, in what field? I'm like, dentistry. And they're like, wait, what? But they're dentists. I'm like, yeah, but they're entrepreneurs. Like, you're a small business owner. Some of you are starting this from absolutely nothing, from the ground up. That's hard, lonely work. Yep. And so when you're dealing with managing, trying to be an entrepreneur, trying to lead your team and be a manager of people and projects, and sit chairside and do really exceptional dentistry, managing also the behavioral challenges of your patients, it is a hard gig. Yeah. And so anything that we can do, that we can bring to the table that helps you to feel like you're supported and that you can get more support out of your team, like that's what we're all about. And that's why I think this is going to be a resource we have to put into our repertoire at ACT.
Oh my gosh.
To help practice owners get through these challenges. Problem solving is a big one in a lot of practices. Getting the team committed to getting on board and feeling empowered. So.
Oh, I'm totally picking up what you're putting down. I'm loving this. If you're listening to the podcast, what are you thinking about this? You can email me and say, that's a great idea or not a great. I'm thinking about a 131 segment where you submit your biggest problems and we help you treatment plan with 131. Send us the craziest stuff, like the weirdest stuff you've ever seen, and we'll help you through it, and we'll show your team how to use the 131 tool. We could actually create a game show once a month called Welcome to 131. Wouldn't that be great? Where you, the dentist and team members, submit your biggest problems, and we will treatment plan them for you and help you through these. But
so this is funny. We talk about working geniuses a lot too. If you guys haven't heard us mention that before, it's super cool. And everyone has their geniuses within the workplace. One of Kirk's geniuses is invention, and he's a visionary, which is why his brain just gets so excited about these new ideas.
It's not a genius, it's a disease at times. Like, it doesn't even, it's not helpful at most times.
One of my geniuses is discerning, which is funny because once I learned that, I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. I know you used to say this every now and then, but I came to you and said, I was always like the solutionist. I always said I needed a card that didn't say practice administrator, it said solutionist, because my brain just works really well in problem solving. So the other thing to think about is that your team is going to adopt this if you try this at different paces and at different levels of mastery. You're going to have some people on your team who are like me, who are discerners naturally, and this is going to be fun for them. And they're going to be really great at problem solving in your practice. And then you're going to have some people that maybe that's a frustration for them, or it's not their genius, and it might be a little harder for them to employ this type of framework. And so just remembering as well that concept that we share of stages of change. Again, shout out to our coach, Jamie, who introduced that idea to us. But everybody moves through the stages of change at a different pace when you're trying new things. And you're just going to have some team members that jump right in and they knock it out of the park. And you're going to have others that struggle through it a little bit more. Just encourage them that, to stay on board. Let them mentor and develop each other a little bit. Know that you might get a slightly different outcome from one or the other. It doesn't make one of them any better than the other. It just means it might be more of a talent for one person than another. And maybe they become someone who really is a solutionist to help you manage through some of these things in your practice. But time spent developing your team now feels like a lot of work, but it saves you, like you said earlier, endless hours in the future when they're competent enough to help you solve these problems day in and day out.
I love this, Miranda. We're gonna do follow-ups on this. And again, we're coaches, so please take this with the right, the right message. If you're an entrepreneur or if you're a human being that's working and your to-do list is running over one page of things, I used to think that was like noble because I'm an entrepreneur. No, it's difficult. That's hard. That means you're taking on way too much and you're solving problems you probably shouldn't solve. So the 1-3-1 becomes a great framework to change all that. Number 2, you mentioned burnout. And I say this all the time about anything. Like, there's no greater fatigue than mental fatigue. There just isn't. Like, you actually love physical fatigue. You love a good, hard day that was like physically or emotionally, challenging, but we succeeded.
Endorphins from like a hard workout.
Absolutely.
You don't get that from a hard mental.
No, the mental fatigue is what creates the burnout, where you're just like, I can't even think about this right now. This is so heavy. And what we want you to do from this podcast is start to embrace the journey of creating a healthy team where people think well, they can solve problems, they come to you, they're bought in. And let me paint the picture. This is not an easy journey. You don't just try it once and everyone's like, I totally get this. You got to stay consistent. You got to be committed to really creating a better team over time. And I'm just so excited about this. So give us some. Oh, go ahead.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So just one thing to think about as we kind of tie a bow on all this too is you are the ultimate decision maker in your practice, right? As the practice owner, there are some things that ultimately you have to be the decision maker on. And really, all things ultimately you're the final decision maker on, but there's some that will only come through you. There's some things you don't want to delegate to your team. But the things that can be delegated, at least to that first 80% or so to your team, like start there. Start with those like departmental or position specific issues, just those little things that you're like, I feel like they could have handled this one. Maybe they just don't feel like they can. So if you give them the expectation, the framework, we're going to try it like this, you do still have to be a decision maker in your practice. I don't want this to be like, hey, if you don't like solving problems, good for you. You never have to do it again. No, the buck does stop with you. That doesn't go away. But it's a great way to help minimize some of those smaller problems that cross your desk. And you might have to give a final stamp of approval, but you're not going to use all of your mental energy to work through the whole process. You can save that for those bigger issues, those bigger decisions that really are reliant solely on you as the practice owner.
Totally. And there are going to be some times where you don't always have, the answers to this aren't always going to be super clear and it's not going to work perfectly, right?
Sure. Just like anything else, like anything that we implement in the office, we want it to be a structured system. We want to have consistency. We want to have alignment around it, but everything's a living, breathing system. And so if this doesn't work exactly the way you anticipate it, great. Have a conversation about it. Align at your team meeting about what's going well, what's not going well. And then let's tweak things a little bit. What do we need to do? How could we do this differently? Maybe you're like, oh, I forget that even is something that we talked about. Great. So we have something printed out or a little pad in the office that people use and they know where it lives and there's a go-to. So like you just have to always, I'm going to say, I don't like the words always and never. I've been catching myself lately. I've been trying to keep myself from saying always and never. You should consider often the fact that this is an infinite game in dentistry. As an entrepreneur, what we're doing as business owners, it's never, ever ending. So we're never finished. And that's the only never I will say. We're never finished as an entrepreneur. And so with any system or project, including something like this, you're working on it consistently with your team, collectively with your team, trying to make everything better every single day. So it'll get there, and nothing will ever be perfect because perfect doesn't exist. Sorry, Kirk. No. Progress over perfection.
Yeah, perfection is a disease. Well, it's I don't know. Bill Lockhart said it best many years ago. He said, perfection is very deadly in dentistry. He said, excellence was always my goal, or progress. Perfection was God's job. There was days it was perfect, wasn't my doing. It's just all the conditions were there. So keep that in mind too.
Yeah, you have a day where all of a sudden you have 7 Post-its on your desk again. You know, devil's advocate. To be fair, maybe my team was really busy today and they forgot we were trying this new, but like bring it up the next day. And get them back on track. Like, don't, can't expect, I love that you can, excellence, I expect, perfection, that's impossible.
Yeah. And I have a whole nother thought on Post-its. Like, Post-its are just ineffective anywhere, all the time, at home or at work. Because if you're poor at follow through, you're going to have them everywhere and you're going to get angry that they're, all over your computer. And what you're going to do, if you're like me, is you're just going to grab them all and go, I got to make these disappear. And you're going to throw them in the trash. And then your team's going to go, well, maybe we should do different colors because he threw all those in the trash.
In America that doesn't have Post-its everywhere. So you're speaking to everyone right now.
I know. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm with you. I agree.
Yeah. There's other ways to do things. And our job, it's called the Best Practices Show, is to help you with best practices. Now, a couple things. I really love considering ourselves as a help first organization. So if you're listening to this, you're like, I don't even know how to run a team meeting, how I'd start this. We have a great resource, great guide, and you can reach out to Gina on our team, Gina. She's like the lead therapist here. Yes, you do have a therapist with us. And she's a concierge. She's a hospitality expert. So we can get you whatever resources you need to get you started on this whole process. And if you're just struggling with, like, I don't even know where to start, you can reach out, learn more about what we do. We're coaches. Don't try to do this on your own. We do this with practices all over the country that are actually amazing. They're just kind of stuck and they don't have the energy to get unstuck. And we're geeks about this. This is what we do. And I highly encourage you to join us for the To the Top Study Club, which is our regular study club of some of the best thinkers in the country. It's 1 day a week. It's in a room in Milwaukee. And selfishly, I love it because I get to learn from the best minds in dentistry. And there's nothing like learning from great thinkers. And it's super fun. And you'll get to hear Miranda if you show up for the next To the Top. And she's one of the most brilliant people in understanding how to create organizational health. So Miranda, thank you for being on and thank you for sharing the 131.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, so much fun. So stick around while we say goodbye to everybody else. But thank you guys for listening to the Best Practices Show podcast. Hey, if you're enjoying today, or if you enjoyed this podcast, do us a favor, just hit the share button. Keep spreading the word. I don't know how it's working. I don't know why it works, but like the podcast continues to grow in countries all over the world. Like in Japan, people are, I've never been in Japan. I want to go. But like, please keep sharing the word and we're going to keep bringing it. We've got a lot of great information on the road ahead. And with everything, our hope is that you're consuming this information, sharing it with your team, improving your own mindset, and these ideas do help you create a better practice and a better life. So keep showing up. So until we see you guys next time, or you hear from us next time, keep watching or keep listening to the Best Practices Show. You guys enjoy your day.